The acrid smell of burning metal and ozone filled the recycled air as Lieutenant Jake Morrison checked his diplomatic protocols tablet for the 100th time. His dress uniform felt uncomfortably tight after months of combat gear, the fabric crisp and formal against his skin. The Alliance cruiser Harmony hummed around him, its engines carrying them toward the Zephyrian homeworld for what everyone hoped would be the most important peace negotiation in galactic history. "Nervous, Lieutenant?" Commander Sarah Chen asked, her own diplomatic uniform bearing the insignia of the Cultural Affairs Division. She'd been assigned as his handler, though Jake suspected it was more like being assigned as his keeper. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." "Just reviewing the protocols," Jake replied, scrolling through endless pages of Zephyrian cultural customs. "Did you know they have 47 different ways to greet someone based on the time of day, the weather, and their relative social position?" Chun chuckled. "That's nothing. Wait until you see their dining customs. The Zephyrians consider sharing a meal to be the most sacred act of trust between species. Everything has meaning, the way food is prepared, how it's served, even how it's consumed." Jake's stomach clenched. He'd survived 3 years of brutal combat against the Zephyrian Empire, earned his promotion through skill and determination, and somehow been selected for this crucial diplomatic mission. But the thought of navigating alien dinner etiquette terrified him more than facing enemy plasma fire. "The Princess Lirelei specifically requested you for this mission," Chun continued, her tone becoming more serious. "After your actions at the Battle of Kepler Station, she sees you as someone who understands honor and sacrifice." Jake remembered that battle all too well. He'd been part of a joint rescue mission when Zephyrian civilians got caught in the crossfire. Instead of following orders to withdraw, he'd stayed behind to help evacuate a Zephyrian shelter, saving dozens of lives. The action had earned him a commendation and apparently the attention of Zephyrian royalty. "No pressure," he muttered, still reading about Zephyrian customs. According to the files, Princess Lirelei was considered one of their most brilliant military strategists and cultural ambassadors. She was also, if the intelligence reports were accurate, devastatingly beautiful by both human and Zephyrian standards. The ship's intercom crackled to life. "Attention diplomatic staff, we are approaching Zephyrian space. Please report to stations for formal entry protocols." Jake's hands were sweating as he made his way to the observation deck. Through the reinforced windows, the Zephyrian homeworld of Ethros grew larger, its crystalline cities glittering like jewels against the deep blue oceans. It was breathtaking and alien, a world that had been enemy territory just months ago. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Remember," Chun said quietly beside him, "the Zephyrians value authenticity above all else. Don't try to be perfect. They'll respect honest mistakes more than artificial politeness." The docking procedures took hours, filled with formal exchanges and ceremonial presentations. By the time Jake finally stepped onto Zephyrian soil, his nerves were stretched to their limit. The gravity was slightly lighter than Earth standard, making each step feel like he might float away. The welcoming party was impressive. Dozens of Zephyrian nobles in flowing robes that seemed to shift color in the light, honor guards with crystalline armor that caught and reflected the planet's twin suns. And at the center of it all, Princess Lirelei herself. Jake's breath caught in his throat. She was tall even by Zephyrian standards, her skin holding a subtle pearlescent quality that seemed to glow from within. Her hair was a cascade of silver white that moved like liquid mercury, and her eyes were the deep violet of Ethros twilight sky. She wore robes of midnight blue decorated with patterns that seemed to shift and flow as she moved. "Lieutenant Morrison," she said, her voice carrying a musical quality that made his name sound like poetry. I am honored to meet the warrior who showed such compassion for my people. Jake bowed deeply, hoping he was getting the angle right according to his briefings. Your Highness, the honor is mine. I'm grateful for this opportunity to serve thee. Cause of peace. Something flickered in her violet eyes, approval, perhaps, or surprise. Please walk with me. There is much we must discuss before the formal negotiations begin. As they walked through the crystalline corridors of the palace, Jake tried not to gawk at the impossible architecture. Walls seemed to be grown rather than built, flowing in organic curves that defied human engineering principles. Light flowed through the crystal structures, creating an ever-changing display of colors and shadows. You seem tense, Lieutenant. Princess Lirale observed, her tone gentle. Is our world so different from what you expected? It's beautiful, Jake said honestly. But I have to admit, I'm worried about making some terrible cultural mistake that ruins everything. She laughed. The sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Honesty. I appreciate that quality in humans. Tell me, what concerns you most? Jake hesitated, then decided to take Chun's advice about authenticity. The dining customs, Your Highness. I've read the protocols, but I'm terrified of accidentally insulting you or your people during the welcome feast. Princess Lirale stopped, walking, turning to face him with an expression he couldn't quite read. The feast is indeed important to my people, but perhaps I should prepare you properly. She paused, seeming to consider something. Would you be willing to join me for a private meal first? Consider it. Diplomatic preparation. Of course, Your Highness. Whatever would help ensure the success of our mission. Excellent. Her smile was radiant. Tonight, after the formal presentations, come to my private chambers. I will teach you our ways properly. The formal presentations were a blur of speeches, ceremonial exchanges, and carefully choreographed diplomatic theater. Jake managed to get through his prepared remarks without embarrassing himself, though he caught Princess Lirale watching him with an intensity that made him nervous. As evening approached, Jake found himself being escorted through the palace's private quarters by a Zephyrian servant who spoke no English. The corridors here were different from the public spaces, more intimate, with soft lighting that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The servant stopped before a door that seemed to be made of liquid starlight and gestured for Jake to enter. Taking a deep breath, he stepped through into what was clearly Princess Lirale's private dining chamber. The room was stunning in its simple elegance. A low table sat in the center, surrounded by cushions that seemed to shift color to match the lighting. The walls showed holographic displays of Ethros landscapes, rolling crystalline mountains, seas that reflected the planet's aurora, forests of trees that glowed with their own inner light. Princess Lirale emerged from an adjoining room, and Jake's breath caught again. She had changed from her formal robes into something more casual, a flowing garment that seemed to be made of captured moonlight, its fabric shifting between silver and deep blue. Her hair was now loosely braided with small crystal ornaments that caught the light. Please sit, she said, gesturing to the cushions. I hope you don't mind the informal setting. I thought it would be easier to learn our customs without the pressure of a formal banquet. Jake settled onto one of the cushions, trying to find a comfortable position. The furniture was clearly designed for Zephyrian physiology, and his human frame felt awkward. Princess Lirale noticed his discomfort and adjusted her own position to match his, sitting cross-legged in a way that seemed more familiar. Better? She asked, and Jake nodded gratefully. Now, she continued, let me explain what you need to know about Zephyrian dining customs. For the next hour, she walked him through the intricate protocols, how food was served in specific orders, how each dish represented different aspects of Zephyrian culture, how the manner of eating reflected respect for both the ingredients and the cook. Jake tried to absorb it all, but the complexity was overwhelming. The most important thing, Princess Lirale explained, is that we eat with our hands. For Zephyrians, the act of touching food directly connects us to its essence, to the life force that sustains us. Using tools to eat creates a barrier between the consumer and the consumed, which we consider ... cold, impersonal. Jake nodded, trying to memorize every detail. I understand, Your Highness. Please, she said with a gentle smile, when we are alone like this, call me Lirelei. We are not so different in age, I think, and formality creates distance when we need understanding. Lirelei, Jake repeated, liking the way her name felt on his tongue. May I ask why you specifically requested me for this mission? I'm honored, but I'm just a combat officer with no diplomatic training. Her violet eyes grew thoughtful. Because you showed mercy when you could have shown strength. At Kepler Station, you risked your own life to save Zephyrian civilians, people who were supposed to be your enemies. That spoke to something fundamental about your character. Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks. I just did what seemed right. Exactly. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes intense. You acted from your heart, not from orders or protocols. That is what gives me hope for our people's future. A soft chime indicated that their meal was ready. Princess Lirelei stood gracefully and moved to a side table where several covered dishes had been placed. The aromas that filled the air were unlike anything Jake had ever experienced, complex, layered scents that seemed to tell stories of alien spices and preparation methods. This is a traditional Zephyrian meal, she explained, carrying the dishes to their low table. Each dish represents a different aspect of our culture, our connection to the sea, to the crystal forests, to the aurora lights of our atmosphere. As she uncovered each dish, Jake was struck by the alien beauty of the food. Nothing looked quite like anything from Earth, but the presentation was elegant, almost artistic. Colors shifted and flowed in the dishes, and some items seemed to glow with their own inner light. The first course, Lirelei said, settling back onto her cushion, represents the bounty of our seas. She reached out with delicate fingers and selected a piece of what looked like crystalline seafood, its surface shimmering with pearl-like iridescence. Jake watched as she ate, noting how she seemed to savor not just the taste but the texture, the way the food felt in her hand. Following her example, he reached out to select his own piece. His hand was halfway to the dish when he paused. Years of military training and Earth etiquette screamed at him that eating with his hands in front of royalty was inappropriate. Without thinking, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his emergency field utensil set. The small metal fork gleamed in the soft light as Jake selected a piece of the seafood and brought it to his mouth. The taste exploded across his tongue, complex, alien, but undeniably delicious. He was about to compliment the chef when he noticed that Lirelei had gone completely still. Her violet eyes were wide, staring at the fork in his hand with an expression of such hurt and shock that Jake's heart clenched. Slowly, as if moving through deep water, she set down her own piece of food and turned away from him. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. I believed you were different. Jake set down the fork immediately, panic rising in his chest. Lirelei, what's wrong? What did I do? She stood abruptly, her back still turned to him. In the soft light of the chamber, Jake could see her shoulders shaking. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with unshed tears. You rejected it, she said so quietly he almost couldn't hear her. The food, the customs, the trust I was offering. By using that barrier between yourself and what I prepared for you, you've shown that you find our ways repulsive. That you find me repulsive. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. In his eagerness to maintain what he thought was proper etiquette, he had committed the exact cultural disaster he'd been trying to avoid. But it was worse than just a diplomatic mistake. He had hurt someone who had shown him nothing but kindness and trust. No, he said, standing as well and taking a step toward her. Lirelei, that's not. I would never. She turned to face him then. And Jake's heart broke at the sight of tears streaming down her pearlescent cheeks. In that moment, she didn't look like a princess or a diplomat or an alien being. She looked like a woman who had been deeply hurt by someone she had trusted. "I prepared this meal myself," she said, her voice cracking. "In our culture, when someone of my station cooks personally for a guest, it is a gesture of the highest honor. It means I see you as worthy of my most intimate trust. But you couldn't even bear to touch what I had made." Jake felt his own eyes begin to burn with tears. "Lorelei, please, let me explain." "There is nothing to explain," she interrupted, wrapping her arms around herself. "I understand now. Despite your actions at Kepler Station, despite my hopes for our peoples, you still see us as aliens, as something to be kept at a distance. That's not true." Jake's voice came out louder than he intended, filled with desperation. "I was trying to be respectful. On Earth, using utensils is considered proper etiquette, especially when dining with royalty. I was trying to honor you." Lirelei's eyes flashed with something between anger and pain. "Honor me? By creating barriers between us? By showing that you cannot trust me enough to share in our most basic customs?" The room fell silent except for the soft sound of her tears. Jake stood frozen, realizing that his attempt at politeness had been interpreted as the deepest possible insult. Everything he had tried to avoid had come to pass, but in a way that was infinitely worse than any diplomatic faux pas. "I need to be alone," Lirelei said finally, her voice barely audible. "Please, just go." Jake's heart screamed at him to stay, to fight for understanding, to somehow fix this disaster. But the pain in her voice was so raw that he couldn't bear to cause her any more hurt. With a heaviness in his chest that felt like it might crush him, he bowed deeply and turned toward the door. As he reached the threshold, he paused and looked back. Lirelei stood silhouetted against the holographic display of her homeworld, looking utterly alone despite being surrounded by the beauty of her own culture. Jake opened his mouth to say something, anything, that might begin to bridge the gulf he had unknowingly created. But no words came. The weight of his failure pressed down on him as he stepped through the door, leaving behind not just a ruined diplomatic dinner, but the shattering of something precious that had barely begun to form between them in the corridor. Outside, Jake leaned against the crystalline wall and closed his eyes, the taste of that alien delicacy still on his tongue. It had been exquisite, complex and beautiful, just like the woman who had prepared it. But his fear of making a mistake had led him to make the worst mistake possible, the diplomatic mission that was supposed to secure peace between their peoples. Now hung in the balance, and Jake had no idea how to fix what he had broken. All he knew was that he had to try, because the alternative, leaving things as they were, was unthinkable. The first step would be understanding exactly what he had done wrong, and then finding a way to prove to Princess Lirelei that his actions came from ignorance, not rejection. But as he made his way through the palace corridors toward his assigned quarters, Jake couldn't shake the image of her tear-stained face or the sound of her broken voice. He had come to Ethros to help build a bridge between their species. Instead, he had managed to burn it down before it was even completed. Now he had to find a way to rebuild it, one careful step at a time, before the opportunity for peace slipped away forever. Jake didn't sleep that night. He paced his assigned chambers, an elegant suite that under normal circumstances would have impressed him with its flowing crystal architecture and holographic displays of Ethros' natural wonders. Instead, he barely noticed the beauty around him as he replayed the disaster of the evening over and over in his mind. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lirelei's face crumpling with hurt, heard her voice breaking as she accused him of finding her repulsive. The memory made his chest ache with a pain that was entirely new to him. He'd been wounded in battle before, had lost friends and comrades, but this was different. This was the agony of having hurt someone he cared about through his own ignorance. As dawn broke over Ethros, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet that had no earthly equivalent. Jake made a decision. He couldn't undo what had happened, but he could try to understand it. And maybe, if he was very lucky and worked very hard, he could find a way to make amends. His first stop was the palace archives, where he convinced a sympathetic Zephyrian scholar to help him access detailed cultural texts about their dining customs. What he learned made his stomach sink even further. The act of sharing food with one's hands wasn't just about touching the essence of the meal. It was about vulnerability, trust, and intimacy. When Zephyrians ate together, they were literally sharing their life force, creating bonds that went beyond mere friendship. For someone of Princess Lirelay's station to cook personally for a guest and then eat with them was, as she had said, the highest honor. It was reserved for family, for potential mates, for those considered worthy of the most sacred trust. By using a fork, Jake hadn't just violated etiquette. He had rejected a profound gesture of acceptance and affection. The princess honored you greatly, the elderly scholar said, his crystalline eyes filled with sympathy. In our culture, what she offered was a proposal of deep partnership. Your response, it must have been devastating to her. Jake's hands clenched into fists. I didn't know. I was trying to be respectful by human standards. How do I fix this? The scholar's expression grew thoughtful. Among our people, there is a tradition called the kithara, the proving of intent. When a great wrong has been committed through ignorance rather than malice, the wrongdoer may attempt to demonstrate their true feelings through action rather than words. What kind of action? That depends on the nature of the wrong, in your case. The scholar paused, studying Jake's face carefully. You would need to show that you truly wish to understand and embrace our ways. That you are willing to be vulnerable as she was vulnerable. Jake leaned forward eagerly. Tell me what I need to do. The scholar smiled, the first truly warm expression Jake had seen from a Zephyrian since the incident. You must learn to prepare a traditional Zephyrian meal yourself, using only our methods and ingredients. Then you must present it to the princess. And eat it with her, using only your hands, while speaking the words of your heart with complete honesty. But I don't know the first thing about Zephyrian cooking. Then you must learn, the scholar said simply. There are those in the palace who would teach you, if you are truly committed to understanding our ways. Jake spent the next 3 days in the palace kitchens, working alongside Zephyrian cooks who initially regarded him with suspicion, but gradually warmed to his genuine eagerness to learn. The head chef, a matronly woman named Vera, whose hands glowed with an inner light when she worked with food, took him under her wing. Cooking is not just preparation, she explained, as she guided Jake through the complex process of preparing sea crystals. It is meditation, intention, love made manifest. You must put your heart into every step, or the food will taste of emptiness. Jake struggled with the alien techniques, burning himself on crystalline ovens that operated on principles he didn't understand, fumbling with ingredients that seemed to have minds of their own. But gradually, he began to grasp not just the mechanics, but the philosophy behind Zephyrian cuisine. The food must know it is cherished, Vera said, watching as Jake carefully cleaned a piece of aurora fruit, its surface shifting through colors like a tiny sunset. When you handle it with reverence, it shares its essence willingly. When you treat it as mere sustenance, it withholds its gifts. On the 3rd day, Jake managed to prepare a simple but traditional meal, sea crystals that glowed with soft blue, light, aurora fruit that tasted like starlight in dreams, and a delicate broth that seemed to capture the essence of Ethro's twin moons. Vera tasted each dish carefully, her expression unreadable. It will do, she said finally, and Jake felt like he had just passed the most important test of his life. But remember, Lieutenant, the cooking is only the beginning. The true test is in the sharing. That evening, Jake stood outside Princess Lirelay's chambers, carrying the meal he had prepared in traditional Zephyrian serving vessels that seemed to be made of crystallized starlight. His hands were shaking, not from nerves, but from the weight of what he was about to attempt. The same servant who had escorted him before appeared at his approach, took one look at the serving vessels, and nodded with what might have been approval. Without a word, the servant led Jake through the palace corridors to a different room. Not the dining chamber where his disaster had occurred, but a smaller, more intimate space that felt like a private sanctuary. Princess Lirelei was waiting. For him, standing before a window that looked out over the crystalline gardens of the palace. She had changed since their last meeting, her usual elegant robes replaced by a simple, white garment that seemed to emphasize her ethereal beauty. Her silver hair was loose around her shoulders, and when she turned to face him, Jake saw that. Her violet eyes were guarded but curious. "Your Highness," Jake began, but she held up a hand to stop him. "I know why you have come," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "The palace staff has been talking about the human who spent 3 days in the kitchens, learning our ways. They are impressed by your dedication, but I must ask, is this merely another diplomatic gesture?" Jake set down the serving vessels carefully and faced her fully. No diplomatic gesture. No protocol or strategy. "This is me trying to show you that I understand what I did wrong and that I want to make it right." Something flickered in her eyes, hope perhaps, or maybe just curiosity. "Then show me what you have learned." With hands that trembled only slightly, Jake began to uncover the dishes he had prepared. The gentle glow of the food filled the room with soft light, and he heard Lirelei's sharp intake of breath. "You made this yourself?" she asked, moving closer to examine his work. "Every step," Jake confirmed. "Vera taught me, but I did the preparation. I learned that cooking isn't just about feeding the body, it's about nourishing the spirit. About showing care and respect for the ingredients and for the person you're preparing the meal for." Lirelei's fingers hovered over one of the dishes, not quite touching. "And what did you learn about the sharing of food?" Jake took a deep breath, knowing that this was the crucial moment. "I learned that when Zephyrians eat together, they're not just sharing a meal. They're sharing themselves. The act of touching food with your hands connects you to its essence, and eating together creates a bond that goes beyond friendship. When I used that fork, I wasn't just violating etiquette. I was rejecting the connection you were offering." Me. Tears began to gather in Lirelei's eyes, but this time they didn't seem to be tears of hurt. "You understand." "I understand that I hurt you deeply," Jake said, his voice growing stronger. "I understand that you were offering me something precious, something sacred to your people, and I threw it back in your face out of ignorance and fear. I understand that I may have damaged something that could have been beautiful." Lirelei moved to stand directly in front of him, her eyes searching his face. "And what do you want now, Jake Morrison?" The use of his first name sent a shiver through him, but he pressed on. "I want to try again. I want to share this meal with you the way it was meant to be shared. I want to prove that I can be worthy of the trust you offered me." For a long moment, they stood facing each other in the soft glow of the crystalline chamber. Then, slowly, Lirelei reached out and took his hands in hers. Her skin was warm, softer than he had expected, and he felt a subtle tingle where they touched. "Then let us begin again," she said softly. They settled onto the cushions together, the serving dishes between them. Jake watched as Lirelei selected a piece of the aurora fruit he had prepared, holding it delicately in her fingers. She brought it to her lips and tasted it, her eyes closing as she savored the flavor. "It's beautiful," she said, opening her eyes to meet his. "I can taste the care you put into it, the respect you showed the ingredients. This is what our food is meant to convey." Encouraged, Jake reached out with his own hands and selected a piece of the sea crystal. The texture was strange under his fingers, smooth but somehow alive, warm despite its crystalline appearance. He brought it to his mouth and bit down, gasping as complex flavors exploded across his tongue. But more than the taste, he felt something else, a sense of connection, of harmony with the alien delicacy. It was as if the food was sharing its secrets with him, welcoming him into understanding. "Now you feel it," Lyra said, her voice filled with wonder, "the connection our people speak of. When you eat with reverence, the food gives you more than sustenance. It gives you insight." They continued the meal in companionable silence, each dish revealing new layers of flavor and meaning. Jake found himself understanding things about Zephyrian culture that had been mysteries before, the way they valued harmony over conquest, the importance they placed on emotional connection, their deep reverence for all forms of life. As they shared the last of the moonlight broth, Lyra spoke again. "There is something I must tell you, Jake. When I prepared that first meal for you, I was not just following diplomatic protocol." Jake's heart began to race. "What do you mean?" "I was interested in you, personally. Your actions at Kepler Station, your willingness to risk yourself for strangers, spoke to something in my heart. I had hoped." She paused, her cheeks taking on a subtle pearl-like flush. "I had hoped that perhaps we might form a connection beyond our respective duties. And when I used the fork, I thought you were rejecting not just our customs, but me. I thought you found the idea of intimacy with a Zephyrian repulsive." Jake set down his cup and reached for her hands again. "Lyra, I need you to understand something. From the moment I first saw you, I was captivated. Your beauty, your intelligence, your strength. You're unlike anyone I've ever met. The last thing I would ever want is to hurt you or reject you." Her violet eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Then why did you seem so distant, so formal?" "Because I was terrified," Jake admitted. "Terrified of saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, of somehow damaging the peace process. I've spent my whole life being a soldier, following orders, maintaining discipline. I didn't know how to be anything else. And now?" Jake looked down at their intertwined hands, her pearlescent skin beautiful against his more mundane human flesh. "Now I know that some things are worth taking risks for. Some connections are worth fighting for, even if it means stepping outside everything you thought you knew about yourself." Lyra leaned closer, her face only inches from his. "What are you saying, Jake?" "I'm saying that I care about you. Not as a diplomat, not as a representative of my species, but as a woman who has shown me kindness and trust and beauty I never knew existed. I'm saying that if you're willing to forgive my stupidity and give me another chance, I want to explore whatever this is between us." Instead of answering with words, Lyra closed the distance between them and kissed him. Her lips were soft and warm, and Jake felt that same tingle of connection he had experienced when touching the food. But this was deeper, more profound, as if their very souls were reaching out to each other. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Lyra's eyes were bright with joy and possibility. "The Kithara," she whispered. "You have proven your intent beyond any doubt. The food you prepared, the vulnerability you showed, honesty of your words. My people will recognize this as a true joining of hearts." Jake felt his own heart swell with hope and something deeper. "Does this mean we have a chance? Not just for peace between our peoples, but for something between us?" "More than a chance," Lyra said, her smile radiant. "In our culture, what we have just shared, the meal, the honesty, the connection, it is considered a form of betrothal. If you are willing, Jake Morrison, you have just proposed to me in the most sacred way my people recognize." Jake's eyes widened. What?" Lyra laughed, the sound like crystal bells in the wind. "Do not look so frightened, my brave warrior. It is not a binding as your people might understand it. It is a recognition of intent, of mutual interest in exploring a deep connection. We would have time to truly know each other, to see if what we feel can grow into something lasting. And If it does, then we would be partners in every sense, in life, in love, in the great work of bringing our peoples together. Can you imagine a more beautiful way to seal the peace between humans and Zephyrians? Jake thought about it, really thought about it. The idea was overwhelming, unprecedented, potentially wonderful and terrifying all at once. But as he looked into Liralee's eyes, saw the hope and affection there, he realized that the choice was actually quite simple. "I can think of nothing I want more," he said, meaning every word. This time when she kissed him, Jake felt the connection between them solidify into something unbreakable. They were no longer just a human and a Zephyrian thrown together by circumstance. They were partners, potential mates, the beginning of something entirely new. As they held each other in the soft glow of the chamber, Jake marveled at the journey that had brought them here. A simple mistake with a fork had nearly destroyed everything. But it had also forced them to confront their true feelings and forge a connection deeper than either had imagined possible. The formal negotiations would continue, the peace process would move forward, but now it would be guided by something more powerful than political necessity. It would be guided by love, understanding, and the unshakable belief that two very different species could become one people. And it had all started with learning to eat with his hands. 6 months later, Jake stood in the grand ceremonial hall of the Zephyrian palace, wearing formal robes that seemed to capture and reflect the aurora lights dancing across Ethro's evening sky. The fabric felt strange against his skin, not uncomfortable, but distinctly alien, a constant reminder of how much his life had changed since that disastrous dinner with Princess Liralee. The hall was filled with representatives from dozens of worlds, all gathered to witness the signing of the historic unity accords between the Human Alliance and the Zephyrian Empire. But Jake's attention was focused entirely on the figure standing beside him at the ceremonial podium. Princess Liralee wore traditional Zephyrian formal dress, flowing robes of deep violet that matched her eyes, her silver hair adorned with crystalline ornaments that caught the light like captured stars. She was radiant, beautiful, and in just a few hours, she would officially become his wife according to both human and Zephyrian customs. Nervous? She asked softly, her mental touch warm in his mind. Over the months, their connection had deepened beyond anything Jake had thought possible. They could share thoughts, emotions, even sensory experiences when they chose to. It was intimate beyond anything he had ever imagined. About the ceremony or the treaty signing, he responded through their bond, watching as delegates from various worlds took their seats in the hall. "Both," she admitted, her fingers finding his and intertwining. "Though I suspect the treaty negotiations will be easier than explaining to my grandmother why I'm marrying a human who once insulted me with a fork." Jake winced. "She's still not over that, is she?" "She finds it amusing now," Liralee assured him. "She says any male foolish enough to bring utensils to a courtship meal and brave enough to spend 3 days learning to cook properly is either completely worthless or absolutely perfect. Fortunately, she's decided you're the latter." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Admiral Thompson and the rest of the human diplomatic delegation. Jake's former commander looked both proud and slightly bewildered as he approached the podium. "Lieutenant Morrison," Thompson said formally, then broke into a grin. "Or should I say, Prince Consort Morrison. I have to admit, when we sent you on this mission, nobody expected you to solve the diplomatic crisis by accidentally proposing marriage." "It wasn't exactly my plan either, sir," Jake replied, then sobered. "But I can't imagine it working out any better. The cultural exchange programs, the joint research initiatives, the trade agreements, they're all built on the foundation of trust that Liralee and I established." It was true. What had begun as a personal connection between two individuals had grown into something much larger. Their relationship had become a symbol of what was possible when humans and Zephyrians worked together, leading to unprecedented cooperation between their species. The sound of crystalline chimes filled the hall, signaling the beginning of the ceremony. Jake and Lirelei took their positions at the center of the vast chamber, surrounded by representatives from both their worlds and dozens of others who had come to witness this historic moment. The ceremony itself was a blend of human and Zephyrian traditions, carefully crafted to honor both cultures. Jake spoke his vows first, in carefully practiced Zephyrian that he had spent months learning, his words carrying the formal cadences required by royal protocol but infused with genuine emotion. Before all gathered here, I pledge my heart, my strength, and my honor to Princess Lirelei of Ethros. I vow to stand beside her in times of joy and sorrow, to protect and cherish the bond we have forged, and to work always for the harmony of our peoples. When it was Lirelei's turn, she spoke in perfect English, her musical voice carrying clearly through the hall. Before all gathered here, I pledge my heart, my wisdom, and my devotion to Jake Morrison of Earth. I vow to stand beside him in times of peace and conflict, to nurture and strengthen the connection we have discovered, and to build bridges of understanding wherever they are needed. The exchange of rings followed, Jake's a band of crystallized starlight that seemed to pulse with its own inner fire. Lirelei's a human-made ring of platinum and diamonds that sparkled like captured earthlight. But the true binding came next, as they shared a ceremonial meal that Jake had helped prepare, eating together with their hands in the ancient Zephyrian tradition. As they fed each other morsels of the sacred foods, Jake felt their mental bond deepen even further. Through their connection, he experienced not just Lirelei's joy, but the collective approval of her people, their acceptance of him not just as their princess's chosen mate, but as a true member of their society. The formal treaty signing that followed was almost anticlimactic after the intensity of the wedding ceremony. Representatives from both species affixed their signatures and seals to documents that would reshape the political landscape of the galaxy, but Jake and Lirelei were barely aware of the historical significance. They were lost in each other, in the wonder of their deepening bond. It wasn't until the reception began that they were forced to return their attention to their duties as symbols of interspecies cooperation. They moved through the crowd together, accepting congratulations and well wishes from beings of dozens of different species, all of whom seemed fascinated by their unusual love story. "Tell me again about the fork," requested Ambassador Vexhari of the Centauri Collective, her crystalline features sparkling with amusement. "I want to understand how a simple eating utensil nearly prevented the greatest diplomatic breakthrough in galactic history." Jake and Lirelei exchanged glances, their bond carrying shared laughter at how often they'd been asked to recount their first meeting. "It wasn't really about the fork," Jake explained patiently. "It was about understanding and trust. I thought I was being polite by human standards, but I was actually rejecting the most intimate gesture in Zephyrian culture. The lesson," Lirelei added, "is that true diplomacy requires more than following protocol. It requires the courage to be vulnerable, to admit when you don't understand, and to risk genuine connection even when it might lead to failure." As the evening wore on and the last of the guests finally departed, Jake and Lirelei found themselves alone in their private chambers, a suite that had been specially designed to accommodate both human and Zephyrian needs. The walls showed holographic displays of both Earth and Ethros, reminding them of the two worlds they now represented. "So," Jake said, settling onto the elegantly curved furniture that was becoming familiar, "we're married. By all the laws of both our peoples," Lirelei confirmed, moving to stand beside the window that looked out over the crystalline gardens. "And bonded by traditions older than recorded history. How do you feel, my husband?" Jake considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, he had been a simple soldier, focused on duty and survival. Now he was married to an alien princess, serving as a bridge between two species, and preparing to help guide the future of galactic diplomacy. It should have been overwhelming. "Complete," he said finally. Like I found something I didn't even know I was missing. Literally turned from the window, her violet eyes bright with unshed tears of joy. That is exactly how I feel. As if all my life I was searching for something, and I found it in the most unexpected place. In a human with terrible table manners, Jake added with a grin. In a warrior brave enough to learn new ways of showing love, she corrected, moving. To sit beside him. The cooks tell me you've been practicing again. Something about wanting to surprise me? Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks. It was true. He'd been working with the palace kitchen staff to learn more advanced Zephyrian cooking techniques. I thought, well, we have our whole lives together now. I want to be able to show you how I feel in ways that matter to your culture as well as mine. Instead of responding with words, Literally leaned over and kissed him, their mental bond flaring with shared emotion. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. There is something I need to tell you, she said, her mental touch carrying excitement and nervousness in equal measure. Something I discovered during the bonding ceremony. Jake's heart began to race. What is it? The depth of our connection, the way our minds merged during the ritual, it's had an unexpected effect. She paused, gathering her courage. I'm pregnant, Jake. Our bond has created new life. For a moment, Jake couldn't process what she had said, then the full implications hit him like a physical blow. A baby? We're going to have a baby? A hybrid child, literally confirmed, her hand moving to rest on her still flat abdomen. The first human Zephyrian offspring in recorded history. The healers say our mental bond somehow facilitated conception in ways they don't fully understand. Jake stared at her in wonder, then reached out to place his own hand over hers. Through their connection, he felt a tiny spark of new consciousness. Barely formed, but already precious beyond description. What does this mean? He asked. For us, for our peoples? It means we're not just symbols of cooperation anymore, Literally said, her eyes shining. We're the beginning of something entirely new. A generation that will grow up understanding both human and Zephyrian cultures as natural parts of their identity. The implications were staggering. Their child would be living proof that the barriers between species could be not just crossed, but eliminated entirely. It would grow up bilingual in both human languages and Zephyrian mental communication. At home on both Earth and Ethros. There will be challenges, Jake said, his mind already racing ahead to consider the complexities. Questions about citizenship, about where the child belongs, about their role in both societies. There will also be wonders, Literally countered. Our child will have abilities neither fully human nor Zephyrian. They'll see connections and possibilities that neither of our species could discover alone. As if responding to their discussion, the tiny spark of consciousness in their bond pulsed with what felt like contentment. Their unborn child was already aware of its parents' love, already beginning to form the foundations of its unique identity. We'll need to be careful, Jake said, his protective instincts already engaging. There will be those on both sides who see our child as a threat to traditional ways, and those who see them as hope for the future, Literally added. The first of a new kind of being, one that belongs fully to both worlds. They sat together in comfortable silence, hands joined over the tiny life growing within Literally, their mental bond wrapped around their unborn child like a protective embrace. Through the windows, the twin moons of Ethros rose over the horizon, their light mingling with the aurora dancing across the sky. You know, Jake said eventually, when I first came to Ethros, I was terrified of making cultural mistakes. I never imagined that my biggest mistake would turn out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. Literally laughed, the sound like music in the crystalline chamber. Perhaps that's the real lesson here. Sometimes what seems like failure is actually the beginning of something beautiful. Sometimes you have to break down walls before you can build bridges. And sometimes, Jake added, pulling her closer, you have to be willing to put down the fork and eat with your hands. Literally and metaphorically, she agreed, settling against his side with perfect contentment. As they held each other in the soft glow of Ethros moons, Jake marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. A simple cultural misunderstanding had nearly destroyed any chance of connection between them, but it had also forced them to confront their own assumptions and fears. Now they were not just married, but expecting their first child, serving as living symbols of what was possible when two very different peoples chose understanding over suspicion, love over fear. Their story would be told for generations: the human soldier and the alien princess, who found love through shared meals and honest communication. But more than that, they had become the foundation for a new kind of future, one where the boundaries between species became stepping stones rather than barriers. Their child would grow up in a galaxy where human Zephyrian cooperation was normal, where love transcended the artificial divisions that had once kept their peoples apart. And it all started because Jake Morrison had been brave enough to learn that sometimes the most important diplomatic skill was knowing when to put down your fork and trust someone enough to eat with your hands. The future stretched out before them, full of challenges and wonders in equal measure. But they would face it together, bound by love, united by purpose, and guided by the simple truth that had brought them together. Real connection required vulnerability, understanding, and the courage to embrace what was different rather than fear it. In the quiet of their chamber, surrounded by the beauty of an alien world that had become home, Jake and Lirelei began planning for a future that would be shaped by their love, their child, and the bridges they would continue building. Between the Stars. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.